We heard it. We all heard it. Prince William was yelling at Camilla when she hit his kids, and guess what? He even stripped her of her title. The palace walls have held secrets for centuries, but nothing prepared anyone for the storm that erupted inside Clarence House. In front of stunned advisors, Camilla turned her fury on King Charles, calling him weak and spineless, and letting years of bitterness pour out. The humiliation cut deeper when staff revealed her cruel remarks about William's children. Words no father could ever forgive. With his jaw set and his heart burning, William made a choice that shook the monarchy. He stripped Camilla of her title and erased her power. But was this the only way to save both his family and the crown? What sparked the explosion? It began like any other planning session. Staff shuffled in with notebooks, advisors laid out their documents, and the air was filled with the usual polite small talk. Everything seemed steady, calm, and under control. But just before 10:30, Queen Camilla rose from her chair and shattered the silence in a way that would change the course of the monarchy. Her voice didn't tremble or hesitate. It cut through the room like a sharp blade, cold and deliberate. People who were present said it was like she had been waiting for this moment for years. She turned to King Charles, her face hard, and unleashed a torrent of words so sharp that some staff couldn't even meet her eyes. "You're weak, spineless, and pathetic," she told him. The words bounced off the polished walls and landed with a force that made even seasoned aides freeze in their seats. She accused him of always siding with Prince William, of bending like a man without a backbone. For those who had known Charles as a figure of dignity and quiet strength, watching him sit in silence as the insults rained down was nothing short of heartbreaking. One palace insider later said the air in that room felt heavier than stone. A senior scheduling officer who had been speaking stopped mid-sentence, unable to continue. Some people lowered their heads and pretended to scribble notes just to avoid looking up, while others gripped their pens until their knuckles turned white. But no amount of pretending could erase what had just happened. The damage was already carved deep into the walls of Clarence House. Charles himself didn't utter a word. He didn't defend himself, didn't argue back. Instead, his eyes sank to the floor and his shoulders slumped, as though every ounce of strength had been drained from him in a single moment. Those closest to him would later describe how the color had left his face, leaving him pale and hollow, almost like a shadow of the man they knew. The king who was supposed to stand tall for the nation looked crushed by the very person meant to stand by his side. Camilla didn't wait for a reaction. She walked out, leaving the staff behind in stunned silence. The meeting ended in awkward fragments, with advisors quietly gathering papers and avoiding each other's eyes. A witness recalled the sight of Charles sitting motionless, almost like someone had taken the very life out of him. People who had served him for years had never seen him so broken, and for the first time, they knew this wasn't just an ordinary marital quarrel. Something had shifted. The hidden files exposed. When the sealed file landed in Prince William's private office at Kensington Palace, it carried more weight than any official briefing he had ever received. Late that night, after his family had gone to bed, William sat alone at his desk and opened the envelope marked "Your Eyes Only." Inside was a full timeline of the Clarence House outburst, every witness listed, and a set of audio recordings that made the entire room come alive again in chilling detail. He pressed play, and the sound of Camilla's voice tore through the silence. Staff who were nearby said they could hear faint echoes of shouting from behind the closed study doors. William didn't move for hours. He read the report once, then again, tracing each line with a heavy stare. With every word, his face grew tighter. The deeper he went, the more he realized this wasn't just about a single outburst. This was proof of something that had been rotting beneath the surface for years. He had tolerated Camilla's presence out of duty, not affection, and he had chosen to remain silent to keep peace within the family. But reading those statements, seeing the way his father had been stripped of dignity in front of staff, something inside him broke. A Kensington aide later revealed that William's body couldn't take the pressure. Just after midnight, his stomach turned, and he was violently sick, gripping the edge of the desk as his staff rushed to bring in a doctor. He was shaking, pale, and drained, one insider shared. It wasn't just anger. It was the weight of realizing his father, the King of England, had been humiliated in his own home. For William, who had always carried the burden of protecting the family's image, this was the moment he decided that silence could no longer protect anyone. And the file wasn't the end of it. Within 48 hours, more testimonies began arriving. Staff who had been loyal for decades started coming forward with their own stories, describing outbursts that had been buried for years. A former events coordinator admitted she once heard Camilla slam her papers down and declare, "Without me, he's just a placeholder king." Another recalled her fury during coronation planning in 2023, where she had demanded the spotlight and dismissed Charles's authority. What had once been whispered rumors now connected into a clear, undeniable pattern. Inside both Clarence House and Buckingham Palace, the atmosphere changed overnight. People spoke in hushed tones, watching every movement with suspicion. A royal planner described it as a dam breaking. Everyone knew the truth was spilling out, and for the first time, people weren't afraid to admit what they had seen. The silence that had protected Camilla for so long was gone, replaced by a growing storm of testimonies. For William, each statement was another brick in the wall he was building against her. He wasn't thinking of scandal or headlines. He was thinking of survival, both for his father and for the monarchy itself. With every new piece of evidence, the decision grew clearer. The palace wasn't just dealing with an angry queen. They were dealing with someone whose behavior had become a threat to the very crown she wore. And William, the son who had been underestimated too many times, was preparing to strike back. Camilla's wrath toward the kids. If there was one line William couldn't let anyone cross, it was his children. For years, he had kept a careful distance from Camilla, treating her with respect in public, even if he had his doubts in private. But buried inside the new testimonies were remarks that hit a place no father could ignore. Several staff admitted that whenever George or Catherine's names came up in conversation, Camilla's temper would flare. What had once seemed like passing irritation was now revealed as deep bitterness toward the younger generation. One aide recalled a private exchange where Camilla dismissed George as the little heir they all worship, and claimed Charles cared more about William's children than about her. Another remembered a 2024 planning session when Camilla snapped at Charles after he praised Catherine's charity work, accusing him of treating her as if she was second best. These weren't just casual remarks. They showed a pattern of resentment directed at the very people who symbolized the monarchy's future. And when those words reached William, they cut sharper than anything else in the file. William's role as a father had always defined him. Protecting his children from the harsh glare of royal life was something he had fought for since the day George was born. To hear that Camilla had spoken about them with venom, undermining their place in the family, lit a fire inside him. This wasn't just about his father's humiliation anymore. It was personal, and it was about the next generation who would one day sit on the throne. A Kensington Palace staffer later said, "You could see the change in him. The moment it became about his kids, the gloves came off." That realization gave William a clarity he hadn't had before. He wasn't simply reacting to a single outburst or a series of cruel remarks. He was stepping into a role that demanded action, not hesitation. This wasn't only about protecting King Charles from emotional torment. It was about ensuring that George, Charlotte, and Louis would inherit a monarchy that wasn't poisoned by fear and bitterness. William's jaw tightened with every new account, and aides said he moved with a determination that left no room for doubt. The palace corridors quickly picked up on his energy. Meetings were shifted behind closed doors. Staff were called in for private interviews, and files that had once been locked away were pulled into daylight. William wasn't asking for opinions. He was gathering evidence. The more he learned, the more he realized Camilla's behavior wasn't isolated moments of anger, but a long campaign of undermining the people closest to him. The breakfast that changed it. All just 3 days after the Clarence House explosion, King Charles asked for a quiet breakfast with his son at Highgrove. No staff briefings, no press notes, nothing on the official schedule. Just a father and son sitting down in the sunroom, where Charles once read bedtime stories to a much younger William. But this time, the air wasn't filled with warmth. It was thick with the weight of secrets that had been hidden for too long. Charles poured the tea himself, his hands shaking as he passed the cup across the table. For a while, he said nothing, his eyes fixed on the patterned china as though searching for the right words. Finally, in a voice worn thin with exhaustion, he began to speak. "She's not kind when no one is watching," he admitted. His tone was low, almost ashamed, as though saying the words out loud made them heavier. He explained how Camilla lashed out whenever George or Catherine came up in conversation, how she belittled him in front of staff, and how every private quarrel left him feeling smaller. William listened without interrupting. He had heard rumors before, whispers that floated through palace corridors, but hearing it directly from his father was something else entirely. Charles leaned forward, his eyes glassy, and added, "I didn't want to lose her, but I've already lost myself." For William, it was like watching a man finally admit a lifetime of pain. One butler who later passed through the hallway said William didn't move for several seconds, frozen by the weight of what he'd just heard. Then, in a moment that changed everything, William rose and walked around the table. He placed a firm hand on his father's shoulder, not as a son seeking comfort, but as a protector stepping into his role. Charles looked up with a tired expression and said the words that gave William his final permission. "Do what you must, my son." Those 6 words carried more force than any council meeting or palace file. They meant the king himself had acknowledged the truth and had passed the responsibility of action onto his heir. That breakfast stripped away the last shred of hesitation. For years, William had tolerated Camilla for the sake of family unity. But now, hearing his father's voice break under the weight of years of humiliation, he knew hesitation was no longer an option. He wasn't acting out of anger anymore. He was acting out of duty to protect his father and safeguard the crown for the generations to come. The Crown Council steps in. The atmosphere inside Buckingham Palace on the evening of May 6th was unlike anything seen in decades. Heavy oak doors closed behind the 12 members of the Crown Council, their expressions grave as they took their seats. This was no ceremonial gathering, no polite nod to tradition. It was an emergency session called at William's command, a move that hadn't happened in generations. The weight of history pressed down on every person in the room, and they all knew what was at stake. William stood at the head of the long table, a thick dossier in his hands. He didn't waste words or try to soften the truth. With a steady voice, he laid out the evidence: audio recordings of Camilla's outburst, signed statements from staff, and a handwritten note from King Charles himself. The note contained just 4 words: "Let this restore order." For the council, that was all the confirmation they needed that the king himself had given permission for decisive action. For 45 minutes, the chamber echoed with testimonies being read aloud. Each account peeled back another layer of the carefully built image Camilla had maintained for years. Aides described her snapping during coronation rehearsals, lashing out whenever William or Catherine were praised, and openly declaring herself the real queen in front of stunned staff. Every story matched the others, forming a pattern too clear to deny. The monarchy's most private cracks were now laid bare in its most sacred chamber. What struck those in attendance wasn't just the content of the evidence, but William's demeanor. One senior advisor later shared, "He wasn't angry, he wasn't emotional, he was focused. He had the weight of his father on his shoulders, and he knew what had to be done." Another added, "We've never seen him like that before. He didn't look like the heir, he looked like the king." Then came the vote. One by one, each council member was asked to raise their hand. The result was unanimous. Not a single voice opposed William's motion. By decree of the Crown Council, Queen Camilla would be stripped of all ceremonial powers, her public role erased immediately. She would still remain Charles's wife in name, but as far as the monarchy was concerned, her reign as a working royal was over. For centuries, the monarchy had survived by protecting its image, by avoiding internal battles spilling into the open. But that night, silence was no longer an option. As one council member quietly remarked, "We weren't saving appearances anymore. We were saving the crown itself." The decision was sealed with signatures, and the process to remove Camilla's authority began at once. When William walked out of the chamber, the gravity of the moment was clear. He had just changed the course of the monarchy forever. For the first time in years, King Charles slept peacefully. But for Camilla, the fall from power had only just begun. From queen to exile. The decision of the Crown Council moved faster than anyone inside the palace expected. Within days, the changes were visible. Camilla's name began quietly disappearing from the royal family's official website. Mentions of her role as queen consort were rewritten, her patronages reassigned, and her photographs shuffled to the margins. What once read public representative of the crown was reduced to a simple line: wife of King Charles III. For a woman who had fought decades for recognition, it was like watching her vanish in real time. By mid-May, her place at public events was already gone. The seat beside Charles during the state opening of Parliament was handed to Princess Anne. Invitations that once bore Camilla's name arrived instead, addressed to William and Catherine. Upcoming engagements, a literacy gala, a charity dinner, even a planned state visit to New Zealand were all canceled without replacement. The official reason given to the press was rest and personal health time, but insiders whispered the truth. She had been sidelined, permanently. Then came the final blow. On September 11th, Camilla was quietly moved out of Clarence House, her longtime residence in London, and relocated to Hawthorne Lodge, a secluded estate in Wiltshire rarely known outside royal circles. The property, modest compared to her former home, had once been used for retired staff members. Now it was to be her permanent residence. "It's like watching a queen become a prisoner," one palace insider observed. Her staff was slashed from 19 to just 4. The elite protection team that once followed her every step was reassigned elsewhere, leaving only a rotating local security detail. Inside the palace, aides said her emails were now filtered through Charles's press office, stripping her of any independent communication. She had begged for her duties back, even suggesting she'd work quietly without public appearances, but every request was denied. The message was clear: there would be no comeback. Charles remained silent in public, but behind closed doors, he seemed broken by the decision. Reports surfaced of late-night phone calls. Camilla pleaded, "Don't let them erase me." But Charles, weary and worn down, answered with words that left her devastated. "I can no longer protect what you've broken." For the king, it was perhaps the hardest decision of his life, choosing his duty to the crown over the woman he had loved for decades. Meanwhile, William and Catherine's star only rose higher. While Camilla faded into exile, the Prince and Princess of Wales became the moral backbone of the monarchy, drawing historic approval ratings and international recognition. It wasn't just the end of Camilla's influence, it was the start of a new era. As one royal historian put it, she was erased from the center, and William stepped into it without hesitation. Camilla had once sat at the very heart of royal power, but by autumn 2025, she was a ghost of the institution she had tried to shape. From queen to exile, her downfall wasn't splashed across tabloids or played out in public drama. It was carried out quietly, step by step, until her reign disappeared into silence. William and Catherine rise stronger. As Camilla faded into exile, the spotlight shifted entirely to William and Catherine, and instead of buckling under the pressure, they thrived. Across Britain and beyond, the public no longer saw them as the quiet heirs waiting in the wings. They were seen as the true leaders of the monarchy, the steady hands guiding an institution that had nearly collapsed under scandal. Newspapers hailed William as the defender of the crown, while Catherine was praised for her grace and compassion, the kind of qualities that reminded people why they had loved Diana decades earlier. Polls told the story clearly. By late spring 2025, William's approval rating soared to 88%, with Catherine close behind at 84%, the highest in royal history since the mid-1990s. For the first time in years, public trust in the monarchy had risen above 50%. People who had once questioned the relevance of the crown were suddenly pointing to the Prince and Princess of Wales as proof that the institution could adapt and endure. One commentator summed it up: "The scandal didn't break them, it made them stronger." Their calendar filled quickly. Catherine hosted a major mental health summit at St. Paul's Institute, where she sat down with over 300 NHS workers. Those present described how she moved through the room with genuine warmth, speaking less like a royal and more like a friend. International delegates were left impressed, noting her ability to connect with people in a way titles could never guarantee. On social media, the response was explosive. Hashtags declaring her queen and everything but name trended for days, signaling a wave of public support that showed no signs of slowing down. William, meanwhile, moved decisively behind palace walls. He cut out dated protocols, streamlined operations, and demanded greater transparency in royal finances. Those who worked with him described a man who no longer hesitated, who didn't waste time asking what should be done, but simply did it. Government ministers noted his sharp grasp of policy and his ability to hold conversations that stretched beyond ceremony. At the United Nations Climate Summit in Geneva, Prime Minister Olivia Hart was spotted speaking privately with him, not Charles. For the first time, foreign leaders were treating William as the monarchy's primary representative. What set William and Catherine apart was their unity. While Camilla's downfall had been fueled by division and mistrust, the Wales couple stood as an unshakable team. Every appearance, every engagement, carried a message of stability. Together, they embodied the future, not weighed down by past scandals, but defined by purpose. A palace insider noted, "They've turned the monarchy into something people can believe in again." As weeks passed, the contrast became undeniable. Camilla's silence grew louder with every day spent in Wiltshire, while William and Catherine's presence filled the void. To many, it felt as though the crown had already shifted, not by law, but by choice of the people. And in that shift, the monarchy found a new heartbeat, one built on duty, dignity, and a promise to protect what had nearly been lost. So, what are your thoughts on this? Let us know in the comments below.